downstream applications for satellite at the very start of commercial satellite. And after that went working with a lot of American think tanks on their next generation of problems. Well, the American enterprise's next generation of problems, companies like Nike, Coca-Cola. So I've been kind of a practitioner, but also somebody that studies and researches what goes on in industry. And I've written in Forbes, Wall Street Journal, Harvard Business Review, and worked for a number of major organizations. So kind of a rounded, I think anyway, a rounded set of experiences. But very much from the business side, although I've worked in application development, it's more defining what the use case of the application is rather than coding or developing the application. So I'm from the business side, and Fin, over to you.
Yeah, so I'm more of the IT guy. So as a CIO or a CTO, most of my career, and having worked originally actually with RBS, but not up north, down south, and very much in the banking and finance sort of space. And then I switched into the .coms with lastminute.com, and then Travelocity.com and paddypower.com. So it was a big change going from banking and finance into these more agile organizations. And we weren't talking about agile back then. It was just getting stuff done as quickly as possible because we were under pressure. So I've worked in different parts of the world in the US with Visa, and also different parts of Europe as well. And it's fun having that kind of technology background. And Haydn and I met when I was at Paddy Power, and this was a sort of coming together of business and IT thinking around what we do. So we are the Flow Academy, as we mentioned, and what we do is, well, we do full transformations, which we call enterprise flow. We fix them, which we now call transformation sprints, but we do fix transformations very quickly. That's Haydn's speciality, rethinking innovation. Do you want to mention that, Haydn?
Yeah, I think that the world's gotten obsessed with speed and innovation, but a lot of the good things in life took a long time to create. And we've just been looking at Nespresso as a case study. I don't know if anybody's aware of this, but Nespresso took 10 years to come to market from the first patent. And once it came to market, it was a total flop. It took 3 years to turn it around. And it was only when it was rebranded just prior to the George Clooney moment that Nespresso started to succeed. So your good coffee took a good 14, 15 years to get to market. So we have to start trying to find some balance between this kind of fail fast, fail cheap mentality and an acknowledgement that actually value takes time.
And what we're also looking at now is how we can bring agility right across a business. And actually, we're actually going to be talking about this a little bit later about how we bring a community around this particular area. But before we do that, we thought we'd have a quick question for everybody. And just to ask the question, does anybody think, what percentage of transformations fail? You can take a little go in the chat, just a quick, just a guess, and then we'll enlighten you.
Somebody said 95%.
Yeah, I think I'd like to meet the person that said 1995. So, well, I'd say you're pretty much all in the right ballpark. So what we've seen and what we've heard from the big four, etc., is quite a large failure rate and business transformation. But then platform transformations, where organizations go to change their platforms and give up, or then the famous digital transformations. And we don't talk about agile transformation. I don't know what that is, by the way, so maybe you guys do, but it's something we find strange. But we find organizations are trying to change their business, change their platforms, or trying to adopt digital and not really doing too well about it. It's a very sobering thought, it's the way we look at it. And then we thought, well, what's happening with the current pandemic? And Scott remembers a presentation I did, or I saw Scott do one as well around our COVID-19 change curve. But this situation that we see ourselves in the moment, there's a large number of organizations across Europe that are actually starting to ramp up their digital transformations. And a large portion of those, like 92% of those, have said that it's critical that they actually transform basically to survive. And we're seeing that across not just Europe, we're seeing it in the US as well. So it's like a lot of people are doing this stuff like very, very quickly because of out of necessity. Do you want to add anything?
A lot of that transformation, I think it's worth stating a couple of things about it. I think first that the failures relative to the expectations that companies bring to those transformations. And what tends to happen is that they launch large transformation initiatives that stand no chance of really meeting their expectations. And I think there's another element of it, you know, that now if people are trying to transform, unfortunately what we've seen is what they really mean is fire people. And it's very much about headcount reduction as transformation. And when we go into organizations, the first thing we notice is that there's a minimum of 25, 30% of cost savings you can make without firing anybody. So this is something I think that we need to find a way of communicating to the senior management that transformation doesn't need to be headcount reduction. You have a lot of waste, designed waste in most organizations that you can address that and attack it before firing people.
So all these organizations are now embarking on transformation. Well, you know, things don't bode well. Given the failure rate, it could be kind of grim. And so we sat back and looked at why do they fail? And a lot of the work that we do is talking to organizations that have had a problem. And sometimes we can't say who they are because they don't want to be known, and they're quite well-known brands. But we reckon there are 4 main reasons. And the first one I would talk about is what I call the agile IT business divide. And in that, what we're talking about is that actually IT teams have been pretty good at agile. All right, there are very different methods out there. There's definitely the kind of Scrum, Kanban, safe, less wars that go on. But I mean, there are frameworks or methodologies that organizations are using. You know, there's stuff that people are doing around DevOps and SRE and stuff like that. You know, so I think in the IT space, there's been quite a move towards becoming more agile. And sometimes that actually puts the business off because they don't really understand what's happening. But in some organizations, they've got to a good kind of structure whereby they are interfacing their portfolio management and product management pretty well into an agile IT team. The very best are doing agile risk management, and some are doing budget on demand, not yearly planning. And that, I have to say, it's a little bit more rare, but it does exist. But we think the bit that's missing is really this whole piece around innovation management and value discovery. And this is where Haydn brought his expertise into what we do and what we call business agility. So maybe you want to say a couple of words, Haydn, about it?
I rarely manage to say a couple of words.
Well, I'm limiting you to that. So.
Well, I think that, again, it goes back to the problem I was talking about earlier, that people have got this idea that the only way to innovate is innovate fast. And I think there's a truth in that. What we can do is we can spin up new value propositions for customers, but without having to change an awful lot of what the product does. So if you can do really, really good customer segmentation, you can really understand your segments, you can spin up lots of new propositions without massive innovation investment. But by and large, we have to combine that with some sense of, we still need to invest in innovation, but we need to be much more targeted about it. We can't do fail fast, fail cheap successfully, really. Most IT departments are too much under the cosh for that already. So we need to understand segmentations better. We need to understand customer success factors better. And we also find that when we go into companies, there'll be a whole pile of assets that the company has that it just doesn't use. So it'll start to do another innovation project. And we've actually sat with teams where they've said, we need to do a project around that. You know, there'll be an issue, like it was an issue in one particular project, which was around keyframe extraction from videos. And as we were sat at the table, one guy said, well, we've already got it. And silence, you know, we've already got it. We've already done that. And that's a big, big problem in firms. They don't know what assets they've got. So we do a lot of work around customer success factors, but also asset discovery, so we can target the innovation better and then look at which elements of an ecosystem can help us to deliver to that target.
Yeah, no, it's really about working out what the best things are to do further upstream before you start to build them further down. And we often find that in the middle there, in the value management, that there's some proxy between product management and what the IT teams deliver. And those products quite often are not successful. Some are, some are not. It's because they have not really interfaced very well with the rest of the organization. And we're trying to get this end-to-end view of agile. That's what we're determined to do, is try and bring this whole thing together. And we think that this is something that agile coaches can do with an extension of their skill set. Some are already in this situation, but we're trying to put this stuff together, predominantly to help them, but also help the business as well. So
I think that needs underlining, really, that when you look at that range of activities, once you go from the agile software shop, as it were, to some kind of agile management, adaptive PMO, to some better way to innovate, who's going to be the voice for that? Because we know there's a voice now in the agile software space, but will agile coaches come on this journey and learn more about portfolio management, portfolio analysis, innovation, customer segmentation analysis, these types of things? They don't have to learn how to do those things, but they have to learn how to coach people to do them.
Okay, number 2 is the core platforms, and it might be a bit controversial here, but when you get the big 4 consultancies come into an organization, they'll start tinkering around the ways of working, the frameworks, etc. When they see these big horrible platforms, they try and run for they don't want to touch them at all. But core platforms can be one of the biggest factors in transformational failure, and it's really because of this problem. And I'm going to let Haydn take this one. Even though I'm the IT guy, I want to hear the business guy talk about it.
Yeah, okay. So we're trying to figure out what is the core platform problem. And the core platform problem manifests itself in a lot of other problems. It manifests itself in a lot of conflict. It manifests itself in the business not believing that IT is trying hard enough, or it manifests as micromanagement, a lot of things like that. And we think it's to do with the fact of where business has gone over the past 20 years. So if you look at offline bricks and mortar businesses, there was a very strong customer experience. You go in, it might be a bad experience, but it's a strong experience. You go in and you meet with somebody, you talk with somebody. And what happened, I think, when we started to go on to the web, was that we were deliberately trying to decrease that relationship quality. If you think back to, say, around about 2008, 2009, the big thing was, how do you do relationships at scale? So not anymore person to person. How do you scale relationships, which is kind of contradictory in nature. So there was this decrease in relationship quality, and over time we've seen a lot of piecemeal legacy estate trying to get this single view of the customer, but not able to. So while you want to get improved customer interaction, you literally can't. And over time as well, what's tended to happen is that companies have tried to put all kinds of digital front ends onto that tangle of legacy, and increasing the complexity and the cost of trying to do customer relationship management. So where you want to be is really being able to provide a full digital experience for customers, and being able to constantly learn about what it is that customers want and what it is they're buying, how they value the experience that you're giving to them. The kind of things you get with the type of Amazon online experience, but also to get there with a good balance of cost and revenues. And I think at the moment, most companies are in this bottom right area. Even when they're transforming to some kind of digital front end or set of apps that sits on a tangle of legacy.
I think that's it. I think the thing is that I know, as a previous CIO or CTO, if someone came to me and said, we need to re-platform, I would have calculated how many years it would be till my retirement and try to avoid it, because you're bound to crash and burn because it's difficult. We've discovered that over time, if you start with one product or service and start to build those things out, you can start to transform off an old platform. But it does take time. It does take a bit of bravery. But a lot of organizations don't, or they start and they kind of give up. And as Haydn says, you end up with a digital front end, on the legacy system. So you get this impression that everything's great, that the front end is doing what it's supposed to do, but in fact, it's still a legacy service underneath. And we see that all the time. And the most successful companies do tackle those legacy platforms. And someone said to us today, well, that's all very well to say that, but those platforms have been around for 20, 25 years. It's not easy. But they started with one line of code 20, 25 years ago, and they have actually become partly, as Haydn said, entangled into your organization. They are the single like the thing that slows you down the most when you're building out new stuff on the front end. And it becomes that kind of, that issue that platform is stopping you getting value to customers. And what we see is the least successful companies just add more and more platforms. And what we've seen so far is a record in one financial organization with 64 core platforms. So if there's a regulatory change on one, they've got to do it in 63 more. That cannot be efficient. That cannot be a good way of working.
It's interesting to reflect on the fact that Amazon was in that situation. When Amazon started out, it had different platforms for its different product lines. So for books or for its hardware or whatever else it was selling for different countries. And it was when it decided that the only way to keep costs under control was to create one core infrastructure, that they became the efficient machine they are. And I don't want to sing their praises too much, but simply to say that's where AWS came from. So probably the most profitable business in tech, AWS, came from addressing the core platform problem. So it's important, it's difficult, but a lot of success flows from it.
Yeah. And then the third one here is complexity. You can see we've been building up to complexity so far. This is one of Haydn's favorite diagrams.
Yeah, well, it's one of my favorite things to criticize in these. So this is the Dave Snowden Cynefin idea that we have these four options. Either life is chaotic, complex, simple, or complicated, and that generally people are finding that the modern environment is complex rather than complicated. And we recently worked with an American multinational, it's like a Fortune 50 company, where they were trying to train the senior management team, so the people that were running the businesses just below the executive team, the difference between complicated and complex. And the whole idea was to say to them, you're moving to an environment which you cannot manage properly, and you have to accept uncertainty, and you have to accept these other VUCA elements, that there's going to be volatility. And it was really dire to listen to all this stuff, because what you wanted to say was the reason you have computing systems is so you can manage infinite endpoints. We have infinite endpoint management capability because we know how to run computing systems. So it's nonsense to talk about complexity. Life can be complicated, but actually what companies do is design complexity in. They design complexity into all the things that they do because they don't address their core platform problem. So yes, there's complexity, but it's designed complexity, and it goes along with designed waste. Said my bit now.
I totally doesn't like it. I'm in the disorder bit anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
Dave comes here quite a lot, and he has like an open bar, and anyone can ask him anything, and it's quite funny.
Well, he's been doing quite well on that one diagram for 20 years, so I wish we could do the same. But anyway, Haydn, this is one of your favorite ones as well.
Well, it's because what we try and say to companies now is, everybody's talking about transformation, and we're talking about digital transformation at the moment, or agile transformation. But when we look back at major changes in companies, so this actually at the left-hand side, supply chain management, you could really put it to 1990, because before you got real complexity in supply chain management, it's probably about a 10-year journey. So say from 1990 to 2020, 30 years, there've been something like 9 obvious points at which the firm has been remodeled. There are probably more. So what we're really talking about is significant transformation every 3 years or every 4 years, probably every 3 years. And that also means that a lot of those transformations overlap. So now that people are moving towards things like asynchronous work and remote work, they're also trying to do AI and machine learning, and they're doing robotic processes. So very, very much a feature of executive decision-making should be the ability to understand the transformations that you're working within and that you're trying to push forward. Instead, we get this other idea that actually there's one transformation, and it's one transformation program, one set of transformation projects. And all those things are just not representative of the reality. In reality, companies need to understand how to transform several aspects of their business simultaneously all the time.
So we're big fans of simplification. And what we've seen is a lot of organizations, particularly at the executive level, complexity has been built in by these guys. They design it into the business. They really haven't understood how their organization operates. So they're frittering around the edges. They create hierarchies, you probably know, to suit their needs. And I was one of those people. And it's not always that clear that you've got the end customer in mind. It's just really about how do I maintain my fiefdom and my 200 people and how important I am. And so there's overcomplication in organizational design. There's definitely some overcomplication in the operating models of organizations. And what we think is the most obvious thing to do is start simplifying things. And part of that is to work with the entire employee workforce and use their collective intelligence. And this is something I learned from Haydn, this, how you can do the crime scene where you kind of put together all the evidence to try and work out who did what, when, by doing it all visually, and you're doing it with all the detectives, all the people involved. And very rarely do employees get involved in the transformation. They become the recipients of what needs to be done. You want to add anything to that, Haydn?
No, I'm good.
And so when we talk to employees, when we go to organizations where we're on assignment, we then play back. It's one of the things we do. We play it back to the leadership in its very raw form. So, and complexity, we always hear the management structure is complicated. It takes months to get a test platform set up. There are too many production platforms. Leaders don't have a clue what agile means. The senior leadership team doesn't prioritize. They just want everything. There's really very little understanding of how you can align resources to value. And very rarely do you get the chance to go back and refactor or fix stuff in the past. And out of this starts to grow a culture of finger pointing or people just doing the minimum, and that's a real shame. And customers are very much outside of the equation often. And it is essentially about trust. And trust is not necessarily that strong in a lot of organizations.
Just on that point, we've compiled this from two different organizations we went into, but predominantly from an organization where people would describe the culture as one of the friendliest places I've ever worked in. Then you start looking at the comments.
Yeah.
We don't deliver change, we just fix problems as best we can. Do as I say, management style. Leaders don't listen or trust us. And we are set up to be mediocre. We don't really communicate with customers. But this is a place where people are really happy to work. So they said.
So when we said that to the CEO, we said that it really is people in this organization. There is no atmosphere. And as playing this back, if you're inside an organization, it's hard to tell the CEO that they don't know what's really happening and it's a mess. But when you're outside like us, it's much easier. And that's what I enjoy doing this the most. Okay, number 4, we'll talk about operating models. And this is the specialist topic for Haydn.
Well, operating models are really, I think, quite a difficult topic to address because people probably don't, I think, have a common definition of them. So people think about a business model, and over the last 20, 25 years, have been thinking a lot about business model innovation and business model canvas, especially around startups, large companies trying to be startups. So if that's the business model, what is the operating model? And I've been having this. Siri's just telling me. I better take my watch off. I was having this conversation with somebody earlier on today whose role is future architecture in his organization. And he was saying the business model is all of the services that it takes to, deliver value at a profit. And I was saying that I disagree with it because I think that the business model is the way you set your relationships up to get revenue. So that can be through distributorships, or it can be through e-commerce, or it can be through subscriptions. All of those have completely different implications for the systems, services, and infrastructure, the processes and internal relationships that allow you to deliver on that business model. So what we find when we go into companies is that it's often their mindset is about this business model thing, this business model canvas technique, whereas their problem is their operating model. They don't have the systems or the structure to deliver the business model that they've been working around.
So you might be a little bit like me. What I said to Haydn was, well, what is one? Can you describe one to me? Even though I've been working in one for a while.
Well, I think, do we have the Michael Porter diagram?
Yeah, we do. It's coming up, yeah.
Yeah, well, we can show you how people have thought about operating models for a long time. So yeah, let's think about it as the technical, people say more than that, it's not just the technical infrastructure and those other things, it's the location. And nobody really took that seriously. For a while, location meant you offshore or you onshore. But now, of course, we know that location is going to be very significant as part of everybody's operating model, and everybody's having to change that aspect of their operating model. And it has huge implications for things like security. But this is what we used to think of as an operating model. If you go back to the 1980s and Michael Porter's books on competitive advantage, he described this value chain, these primary activities, inbound logistics operations, outbound logistics, sales and marketing services, and a number of support activities. And most people, most executives, I would say, have been brought up with that idea of the operating model as a kind of value-adding segments of activity or silos of activity.
Then what you see in transformations is that organizations try to move away from that model, and they often are sold something which is the Spotify model, which doesn't exist, and even Spotify will tell you that themselves. And I've been there, I've spent time with the guys, and they chuckle when people talk about it. And or SAFe is rolled out as something like that. And we're not here to knock SAFe, but it's not being applied correctly, shall we say? And what we talk about is a generative model is what's really required. And we've drawn a diagram. We did as part of our flow work is we've kind of put together what we think creates a good operating model. And what we're going to do is we'll just walk through each of the little chunks for you. So value discovery, Haydn?
Well, before we go through the chunks, I think it's worth just reflecting on that idea of generative, that if you look at most transformations, what we've been saying so far is that organizations don't understand the concept of the operating model often, yet they're trying to get to a new one. So they don't understand how this one's screwed. They don't understand necessarily why it creates all these superficial problems like conflict. And yet they're trying to get to some other fixed operating model, which is often things like the SAFe or Spotify, because then you've got something you can identify and you can run towards. Mm-hmm. It's better to think in terms of a generative model where what you're really trying to do is develop the new practices that allow you to address transformation frequently. Because as we said earlier, you're transforming something every 3 years, and you're probably at any one time managing 2 or 3 transformations. So you need to develop a generative capacity. You need to be able to generate new versions of your operating model regularly. So with this one, we started with our own flow things. You need to think about value discovery, because most value discovery or most innovation practices at the moment are broken. So it would pay most organizations to revisit value discovery.
And value management is kind of what I started doing, connecting IT to the business, which is really around adaptive portfolio management. And in fact, in Flow, we call it the executive portfolio management wall, because if you call it that, then the executives turn up, or they think, oh, it's executive, I must do it. But essentially what you're looking at is the portfolio of work that organizations have. And is it really aligned to value? Is it aligned to the strategic goals of the organization? And you can probably take 25 or 30% of those projects off the portfolio that are currently planned or in place, because they're a waste. They're not going to be of any value whatsoever. And every place we've gone to, we've done the same thing. We've even got executives saying, why are we doing that? And why are we building this? And what's that? And there's this kind of disconnect between them and what's actually being done from a portfolio perspective. And then value delivery, I mean, that's the IT piece. And I think, I don't think there are any wrong agile methods, even the scale ones. I just think they're not really well implemented. And if they are handed down to people, then there's a natural sort of pushback from individuals that don't want to be told what to do. And without value discovery and value management techniques, you end up delivering low value at pace. So that's a waste of time, essentially. Hayden.
Yeah, I think the agile community, I think the software development community in general has been really good at developing learning mechanisms. You think of the whole open source software movement, it's really one big giant university for how to learn about software and how to learn about the next generation of software and how to build it. And I think that organizations have a lot to learn from that. At the moment, they get stuck with things like test and learn cycles, and they don't do them very well. We've actually been in an organization which has test and learn as one of the strongest mandates of its transformation program, and it's actually doing absolutely none of it whatsoever. So we need to be thinking about these learning mechanisms, and we need to, I think, my own personal view, we could learn an awful lot from open source software on that.
So then it comes down to the core capabilities. What we often find is that organizations bring in consultants to do the transformation and actually to build or create it. And they leave the existing team there who are just watching their roles being taken away. And it causes this kind of cultural issue. We think that investing in individuals, and if you're going to transform any platforms or any services or whatever, you bring people with you. And it's really about offshoring the stuff that you want to go away, not the stuff that's core to your business. And I ran an offshore development team in Argentina. I had 400 people there, and we were given all the good stuff to work. And I was kind of surprised. Why aren't we doing all the crap that nobody wants to do in the US? But that's the way it works. And it's just all about cost arbitrage generally. So
there's something as well about that core capability idea where we have to be looking at tomorrow's core capabilities. And we find HR departments would struggle with that they don't really know how to identify the next generation of skills that they need.
Yeah, and they also don't understand some of the roles like agile coaching or whatever. And that often comes out as being seen as a cost rather than a value. Then might surprise people to see security here, but it's fundamental to the way that we operate these days. And it shouldn't be seen as that kind of, oh, I've got to do a pen test before I go live, or I'm going to do this before I do that. You know, there are some of the very best organizations are investing in cyber agility, where they are actually attacking themselves all the time. They're constantly attacking, looking for weak points so they can just preempt anything that would happen in the outside world. So you'll see this has gone beyond some of those OWASP techniques that have been out there, but they're really embracing security, and we're keeping an eye on this because I think that's the future, is making it a fundamental part of your operating system.
So we said earlier that the what companies tend to do, those that are trying to become customer centric, I think they fall into a trap where they focus on their high value clients. It's particularly the case, I suppose, in financial services, but not only in financial services. When we've worked in energy, what the company will focus on are the customers with the highest lifetime value. And that's a classic disruption trap. If that's what you're doing, you're not looking at the market around you. And even somebody as conservative as Clayton Christensen pointed that out, you know, that basically the disruption trap is to focus on high value clients. So you've got to think more in terms of the external world, what's going on in the market. Your customers are not just the people that you're selling to today. Your customers are all the potential people that you can develop new services for. And they're the partners that can help you to deliver to that. And that, of course, is the ecosystem. And the idea of the ecosystem is becoming more prevalent. I don't think it's becoming any clearer, but the language is being used more. And we have a lot of ideas around what the ecosystem means and how you should set yourself up to manage it.
And then right in the middle is the core platforms. I mean, the choice of the technology systems that a company buys or builds has a profound impact on the operating procedures and the model. So I think this is something that, you know, organizations have to go a bit beyond just creating APIs into a legacy system and prolonging its life longer than it should be. Sweating the assets too much is not going to give you the kind of agility to reach out into that ecosystem and from a customer or partner perspective. So with Lighthouse Thinking, what we've done is we've put together a set of concepts and actions to generate the right operating model for, you know, the context of an organization. And that's, well, we've kind of got it, I'm not really sure if we call it a knowledge base or whether it's a whole set of things you can use. And we'll only talk about one or two today, but there are things in the Lighthouse Thinking that will get you to that point where you're able to do the right thing as far as your organization is concerned. And so that's the question we get asked, is how do you transform the operating model? Of course, you need to buy a book, which is coming out soon in the future, shameless plug, but will be out in September, hopefully. So maybe you want to start this one off, Haydn.
Yeah, so there's two ways to think about the transformation sprint. One would be, are you already working inside the organization, trying to understand some of the problems that you're hitting with in a transformation, or are you outside the organization being asked to come in and fix something? So our perspective is usually we are being asked by somebody because the transformation is so broken that it's getting beyond people's ability to control it. If you're on the inside, you can probably influence that transformation at the design stage, or at least long before there's a need to call people in. So there's those two perspectives, internal and external. But basically what we're doing with the transformation sprints is we try to come up with a way of fixing a transformation problem within 4 weeks. And we have a number of phases in that we act on really quickly, because what we do is we use templates of things like when you try and define the as-is state of an organization, or this future business. We've got future business model there, it should be future operating model. When you try and define this future operating model, we have templates for that. We have templates for how you can think about the external economic environment and the external competitor environment. So although this looks like a lot of work, gathering perspectives from all layers of the organization so you can understand everybody's take on what's going wrong, defining the issues, defining the most important issues, looking at the as-is and the to-be models, and playing all that back to leadership. It sounds like a lot. It is a lot. A big consultancy would take 6 months worth of revenue off you for that. But actually, given that the problems are recurring problems, you can do a lot of this work on a template and you can get it done very, very quickly.
Yeah. And then playing that back to leadership is key, and getting alignment around what outcomes they expect. We often find there is a mismatch between what the leadership think the goals are and what the team are actually doing. And just showing that there is a mismatch is a massive thing to do. And then talking about a small lighthouse project as a way of starting to move in that right direction. And it is kind of a small step strategy, but it's also, again, it's making sure you don't say, right, we're going to transform a 50-year-old platform and we're going to do it in 3 months. I mean, that's just not realistic. It's like, how do we simplify some of these problems or projects down to something that could actually be a good example of what should be doing in the future? And scaling that challenge down is about how you can then skill a team and take that team and create 2 teams from it, and take that team and create 4, and so on. Start to grow out the skills across your existing team, your existing core capabilities. But a lot of organizations will do a Lighthouse initiative without doing that scaling. But people ask us, how do you scale? And that's how you scale. But you really do have to have something to say, look, we have done this. We've done it in a short period of time. We've proven that we can get you some value. These are the things we now need to do to start rolling this out throughout the organization.
I think that idea as well that you mentioned there, Finn, that value is so important, because what people tend to do with projects is that old-fashioned thing of setting them out sequentially. And it's partly to do with project management's history in the construction industry and the military, that a number of things had to happen. There's no point in putting your foundation blocks down if you haven't actually dug the trenches and poured the concrete. So there is something very sequential about that. But actually in software and product development, a lot doesn't have to be sequential. You don't have to set out the grand plan. You can look for those points where you can create value really, really quickly. And you can build your work breakdown around value as the driver rather than sequence and time as the driver.
Yeah.
There's something else that I think we should try and bring it to life a little bit with an example. And we haven't rehearsed any of this, so I'm going to start with an example, and Finn will correct. But we were working with an organization where they actually had 3 operating models. And it shows you how difficult it is for senior executives to even understand the concept. So they had one which was a typical platform and ecosystem model where they'd built a platform for app developers to work to. They'd also developed a digital platform for mobile sales, and they'd got their own original set of systems for working through distributorships. So actually they had their software teams being pulled between these three things all the time. You know, so if the business hit a rocky patch, everybody would be pulled on to whatever it took to get the distributor operating model, part of the operating model right. And then they'd be pulled back over to the digital because they were having a lot of shopping cart drop out. So what we did with that project was we said, let's just take one product. Let's think about one period in time when that product might be relevant to a very specific segment, and let's just work that example through. And what it was to simplify it, absolutely simplify it, we said in the autumn, people are likely to start buying blankets. So why don't we focus on blankets as the online product that we're going to sell? Why don't we start to think of some new design ideas about how to do that, and some new channels and how we might function differently in those channels. So actually it was in the space of 2 days, we came up with a way to give them a look at the future, you know, that you start, instead of trying to figure out how to solve the problem of 3 operating models and the hell that was being a software developer in the company, let's just start with a little something that allows us to start figuring out what your future digital operating model will really look like by doing a very small project. And in that small project, find a way in which everybody works on the same team, whether you're marketing, sales, software developer, UX designer, or whatever.
It doesn't sound like a sexy project, a blanket, but they were an imaging company, and the idea was to put your pet's picture on it. And it was a snuggle blanket, and you'd have a lovely picture of your dog or your cat, and you could buy it on Instagram. And we're talking to executives that don't even know how Instagram operates because they don't use it. So it's an example of how you'll use a new channel to bring something to market. Anyway, we wrapped the transformation sprint and Lighthouse project around the operating model. Generally, it's, you know, what you're trying to do is get, in our world, mostly value discovery out to customers and through the ecosystem. But you also use this for other parts of your operating model which are not necessarily working. Spend 3 or 4 weeks trying to work out a particular area that needs to change and coming up with a small example of how you can bring that to life within the operating model. And to Haydn's point, you just keep doing this and make it generative. I'll let you take this one, Haydn.
So just a summary of what we've been saying so far, really. So I think a lot of people know you need to scale big problems down. People continue to design big projects and create big problems, but you need to scale them back. So there's nothing particularly new in that message. Scale down into smaller units of work. But I think where our thinking does differ is that we do say you have to move away from traditional project management work breakdown techniques, and somehow use these analogies or show through these analogies like construction that those sequential work breakdown sets were there for a very good reason in some industries, but don't really belong in software or anything where software is involved. You can go on you can be driven by value, and your work breakdown can be driven by value, and your project management can be driven by value. So that's the first thing, you know, shift how you break projects down, scale down, but shift how you break the projects down as well. And build an innovation in customer experience, because I think actually there are probably different ways to do this. There are obviously those projects where you're going to be doing a Lighthouse project because IT needs to do something differently. But by and large, if we go back to that example with the blankets, the experience that customers were getting in that example is the experience that a lot of companies get online. They see a catalog, and they see a catalog because the way the company organizes itself is through the SKUs that go into that catalog. And their objective becomes, let's get our catalog online. Whereas their actual objective should be, let's build a relationship with a segment of customers that we can get involved with and learn from and build into our learning mechanisms. So given all that, we have here, you know, create or use a new platform as a starting point for a new operating model. I mean, basically what I think we're trying to say there is that if you go back to the idea of the SKU, the catalog, that would be embedded in all those old platform problems, all those old platform entanglements. Whereas what you really want to do is take something that's separate from those things, because ultimately you're trying to draw people out of the legacy. So that's that. So the other thing is, if you look at the ways of working that we've recommended in Flow, the handbook and 12 steps to Flow, it's very much about trying to do work in a very visual way. So what we try and say with the Lighthouse projects and in Lighthouse Thinking as well, is when you start to do those, when you start to develop these projects, going back to the Snuggle Blanket, our Snuggle Blanket project, the reason we were able to do it in 2 days is we drew it all on the walls, as you all know. But the interesting thing about it was we actually ended up drawing the operating model. So we didn't just draw the sequence of events, the customer journey, and how the customer would plot a route through from discovering the blanket through to purchasing it. We were actually able, with the small group, about 8 people from sales, from marketing, from software development, we were actually able to draw the operating model and pinpoint this problem that they had never realized, that they actually had 3 competing operating models. So delivering these things through new ways of work, particularly ways of work which allow you to get hold of the collective intelligence, be steered by the collective intelligence of the people around you. It really does make a radical difference to what you're able to achieve and how quickly you're able to achieve it. And I think that is part of an overall process that when you reach these points where you get significant breakthroughs in how you understand what's wrong in the company, you can start to educate the leaders on how to solve that, how to remodel it through a Lighthouse project.
So who will lead the change? Well, I think you probably guess this one. We've been focusing on agile coaches, and we think that's the key to this. But there will be other roles within organizations. We're starting to see agile HR, agile risk and other functions. But we think that people do need to be coached and brought on a journey, because part of this is around, good coaches are people that can convince leaders to take a leap of faith, and transformation sprints is something that we've broken down into. The book itself is different from our other books. It's actually more of a playbook. It's got exactly what you do on day 1, day 2, day 3. And it's convincing the leadership that let's give this a try, particularly if your transformation's not in a good state. We really want to get some of the coaches that are very much IT based to really broaden into the business and learn more business things, as I've done. I'm less worried about methodologies now. I'm not so angry about them as I used to be. I kind of see that the thing is to make them more effective. And so what we've been doing is this is introducing the agile business. We're going to go through a rebranding ourselves, and we're focusing in on how to bring together a community to gain access to the knowledge base that we have, that the examples that we've been talking about today, and also training courses that people can use, and really learn about this. It's more of an organizational view. It's a wider thing, and it's not just IT. And we've got so much stuff that we've been working on and trying to put all of our knowledge from practical examples into this. And so, yeah, we've decided that this is a really good thing for us to share with the wider world, and it's going to launch hopefully soon. These are our sort of final sort of takeaways for you. As you probably guessed, an agile business means it really does need more than IT agile methods. There has to be really become much more skilled at creating customer value. Complexity really is a killer, and I think simplification is something that it can be done, and you try and use it in every part of your life as you can. Core platforms is a tricky one to get organizations to get behind, but actually once you start to realize that, you step back, a lot of people have been involved in programs where the core platform brought them down. And we think that Lighthouse approach to scaling a problem down, skilling up the team, really really makes it much more manageable. And for us, we do like to be contacted. We're quite active on much more on LinkedIn these days than Twitter. Twitter's become completely messed up with lots of people complaining about stuff. But we're happy to be connected. Transformation Sprints, as we mentioned, is coming out in September. And then later in the year, we're going to be putting out a book, probably a little bit more like our original first book, which is a bit more of sort of in-depth information and examples, etc. But yeah, it's all coming along soon. Anything you want to add, Haydn?
No, it's good. We're also writing something on value discovery, but we haven't decided on a date for that yet.
And that website is up and running, and you can enter your email address if you're interested, and if you're not, don't worry. So, but that's it. We're done.
Brilliant. Thanks, Fin, Haydn. See you both. Sorry, I was slightly detained, so I'm slightly late to the party this evening. But no, that was fab. Thank you. Questions? We do have a few coming in. I was just worried there when you were talking about people complaining on Twitter. I think you were talking about me, weren't you?
Yeah, of course, yeah. You were up early in the morning and watching series on TV and stuff like that. No, we see Twitter has become much more, just like community-based, and LinkedIn is where all the business stuff is happening at the moment. So it used to be a bit more of a balance, but not that I'm complaining, but there you go.
No, I think that's probably a fairly good generic view that most people take in terms of the difference between the two channels. We do have some questions for you. I'll have to sift back a little bit, see if I can find the first one that popped in here. I think it was round about the time I conveniently joined the session. Right, okay, I think you'll like this one. So obviously you'll be familiar with sort of Eli Goldratt's work and sort of inherent simplicity, and how does your own work kind of match up with that?
I'm not familiar with that. Do you know that, Haydn?
No.
No. Oh, there we go.
So, I mean, I'm happy to learn about it. So, and from our perspective, simplification is the key. And I think that if there's any other thinking out there we should read, we will do. We're just like you guys, So,
I'm happy to offer it to Ravi if he's still on the call. Ravi, do you want to sort of unmute and say a little bit about your motivation for that question and your own thoughts, if you think there maybe is some alignment around your understanding of that work and what you've heard this evening?
It's just that Goldratt's one of his core ideas was that if a problem is complicated, then you're not looking at the problem right. And if you can redefine the problem, a lot of times step back to a higher level, problems should be inherently simple. And then a lot of his work was to say, as you start to do these small improvements, to look at the problem correctly and identify the focal point that has the highest leverage, where you can get the most bang for your buck.
Yeah, well,
the book, I think, was called The Choice, where he talked a lot about that, in case you want to go look it up.
It's very interesting because we were looking recently at this law, is it Gould's law, which says something similar. That, well, it says the same thing the other way around, which is that people tend to design complexity into systems, and it's partly to do with the fact that once you've got a system, whatever that system looks like, you add to it, and you never detract, you never retire part of a system. Your next line of thinking on the system is to add more to it, and then add more to it and more to it. So systems do start out simple, but there is this other way of looking at it, or the goals, or I think it is, that they inevitably become more complex. And they've probably reached a level of complexity that, as Dave Snowden reminds everybody, that it now feels unmanageable.
Great. Well, thanks for that. I've got a quick one of my own before I go back to the chat. So just as I joined, you were talking a little bit about, well, you started to talk about the transformation sprints, but you were using interesting terminology around the operating models and the kind of as-is model and the to-be model. And I kind of done some sort of TOGAF type stuff in the past in the enterprise architecture space. And I just wondered whether there was some kind of alignment there, or whether this type of thinking would be useful to enterprise architects. So,
yeah, I mean,
I know you've mentioned agile coaches, but could it equally be of value to them?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a challenge, I think, for enterprise architects to get their work in front of leadership teams who can then understand it, because inherently some of these things are overcomplicated. most of you might know Troy McGuinness here is, with his work around the big Kanban man with statistics and Monte Carlo simulations. We worked together in the US, and he was the enterprise architect there. And he did a really great job of making this a simple one-page diagram that a business person could say, okay, now I see where we are. And then, and what we've done is created the opposite, which is like now where you need to get to, and what you need to change on that journey. Whereas, some architectural diagrams are so complicated, maybe, and quite rightly are a reflection of what is in the organization, but the skill is to get that information across as that you need to change, not that it's too hard to do, as it were. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There's another element that I think is growing alongside that, which is business architecture. And that's more popular in the States, I think, than it is over here. It's almost esoteric, but people don't talk a lot about business architecture. And I think, again, it comes back to we are or have been over-focused on solving some of the problems of waterfall. So we have a lot of thoughts around how IT should function better. But what we're doing, I think, is saying that there's business architecture, there's enterprise architecture. They all come into an operating model. And if we start to think about the operating model, what we want to see people move to is the capacity to keep changing it.
Yeah. Adapting to change, I guess, is at the heart of it. Brilliant, thank you, gents. Got a nice generic one here from Liz. I'm sure you'll have lots of wonderful tips for us. How do you get buy-in?
It depends.
I'm sure that was specific to one aspect of what you were talking about, but use your chance to share some of your wonderful insights.
Well, for us, it's slightly different because we're called in when there's an issue, so we say, and we've often walked away from organizations that we felt weren't really up for it. They were just doing, well, we better go and talk to somebody about how we do this, so we've walked away in a few cases where we think, right, this is going to be a crash and burn, and the management's not bought into it. But we're often that what we see is that we kind of say, look, it's a short period of time to do the sprint. And if you can do, in fact, we've done some in 3 weeks, almost 2 weeks, to prove to an organization that we can show you what all the issues are. If you're an internal person, then what we've found is that that people give our books out to their leadership to read, because there's a lot of sobering thoughts in there, because they don't always read these things. But or I've actually been asked by people to give them some advice. Like I did a meetup a while back, and one of the people there had an issue, and I spoke to them, this is what I would do if I was in your shoes, and just step them through. It's difficult to be generic right now, but we're designing transformation sprints to be useful for internal people as well as external experts, shall we say.
And I think that is, that example you were alluding to there about walking away from jobs, is often because what will happen is somebody will approach us who knows that the company is in a really chronic state. And then they'll introduce us to somebody higher in the hierarchy, and that person will not acknowledge any problems at all. So what you're seeing in that situation is, I think, what you're referring to, that actually there are people who cannot get buy-in. Therefore, they go to a consulting firm, or they go to people like us in the hope that we'll get the buy-in for them. And sometimes it's just impossible.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Did I help you, Liz?
Yeah.
Always happy to chat offline as well, always.
You have to remember about the transformation sprints that you're only asking them to commit to 4 weeks. And most organizations are wasting months and months and months, so to say, look, this is a small deal, really. It's 4 weeks, and we can do a lot in those 4 weeks to solve this problem.
And the execs only have to come for the beginning and the end. It's just like a couple of hours either side. All the work is done outside of that. But anyway.
That's exactly how they like to operate.
Exactly. So
excellent. Nice one here from Scott on sort of how this type of thinking is integrated with OKRs. Scott does love his OKRs. Yeah. So is there sort of so how do you ensure that there's like an emergence, but also that you're pulling towards the sort of larger goals?
Yeah,
here he goes. Well, I'm pretty well like that.
Yeah, no, I think with OKRs is, again, it's just like other things that have come from, say Google or other places that have used these techniques. They don't always translate necessarily into a bank or a financial institution. And when we talk to execs, I can guarantee you now, none of them have got OKRs. None of them. I mean, we find it difficult for them to actually articulate what their 3 or 4 top goals are. And when they do it, the rest of the team say, really? Is that the most important things we're supposed to do? And there is a thing with OKRs. I mean, I've not actually really used them that much, but I do know that you only have to reach about 70, 80%, and you kind of get a tick in the box. And I don't think that's the objective. For me, the objective is to do something completely, not necessarily enough. Yeah, I think we've kind of got this thing going now, which is just tell us the 3 important things you want to work on, and then we will make sure we ladder to that. So
there is also an assumption with those ideas like OKRs that executive teams have vision, mission, goal. They don't. You'd be amazed if you actually try and get an executive team to set out, well, what is your vision? What is the mission? What are the goals? And they literally don't know.
Well, I think that's something a lot of us have seen over the years for sure. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Question here from Jack. In the current position where lots of companies will be trying to cut costs, yeah, absolutely. How can you influence companies to take on the very costly replatforming projects?
Yeah, it's a really good point, and I think that what we have seen is that that perhaps this is different thinking to other people, because the main way that organizations have gone is to create service layers or APIs into their back-end systems, and I mean that will extend the life a little bit, but again it's lowest common denominator, that those core platforms will slow you down. Some platforms, people that work on them are getting into the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and those skills are no longer going to be available. I mean, I can still do assembly programming, but there are not many people that can. And there are systems out there running major platforms still using those types of technology. So we toyed with the idea of writing a book around it, but it sounds kind of boring, like core platform problem, and no one would actually read it, But we've been trying to educate executives around this. But the one key thing I can tell you is that as they cut costs, it's a race to the bottom. And in every single downtime, the 2008 crisis, the crisis we're in now, you'll see the companies that actually grew are brand new. They don't have these core platform issues. In 2008, it was a lot of .coms that arrived. I was in a .com during a period of financial instability in the markets. We're seeing it again now. So yeah, I know of a bank today that are laying off 1,400 people, some of my friends. Is that really going to help them? No, they're just not being brave enough. They really are not being brave enough. And we need to get the message out there. So we're trying to get the message out there that you can do this by product or service by service, and not have this kind of mishmash of new versus old. So anyway.
There's another side to it as well, which I think we don't pay enough attention to. And it's the kind of thing that comes out in conversation between Fin and I, because we're both from different parts of the business. And it is that the business never retires business lines. The business will continue with business lines that are counterproductive. But you try getting a salesperson to sell a new product. It's one of the most difficult things to try and do, because what they do, they know what they are selling, and they know what commissions they're getting on it, and they know the people they've sold it to, and they know what the upsell and cross-sell opportunities are. So actually getting a company to say, we should no longer be making that, we should no longer be offering it or selling it, is difficult. And getting people to move to new products is very difficult. I think those are very closely related to the core platform problem.
It's a good example, because there are companies that have got products with 3 or 4 customers on it requiring lots of support, or a company with 64 core platforms that we mentioned before. And one of those core platforms is a spreadsheet that they just can't get rid of. It's got 10,000 customers on it or something. But they hang on to that volume. It fits into their level of revenue that they're actually making, and it's difficult for them to let go. So we try and show that simplification can allow you to retire some parts, or can help you to retire a platform as well. So.
And I guess just sort of building a little bit on Jack's question, so using that sort of Lighthouse thinking approach. Have you had any sort of notable or unexpected sort of success over the sort of little challenging period we've had of recent months with the global pandemic, without obviously giving away any corporate sensitivities or anything?
No, I think executives are surprised when we base it around delivering value and tracking that value very quickly. I mean, something that I did when I was at lastminute.com in the mid 2000s. Every morning, the executive team, we used to review the sales of the night before, and we would be tweaking the website to see if we could increase conversion. So there's nothing that executives like more than to see more money coming through the door. So in a Lighthouse project, if it can be associated with delivering value and you can measure that value quickly, then you're going to get their buy-in. So, and we've done that. It's mostly, that's why we think it's generally, it tends to be kind of products that other things that get them excited for that. And then you've got them for other things after that. What do you think, Haydn?
Well, I think that, so I did a bit of work in Africa about 3 years ago, and it was really interesting, great place to go to. But before I went there, somebody said, what advice have you given to a company that has led to a significant product achievement or success? And my answer to that kind of question is normally, I've given lots of advice to companies that companies have happily ignored. And I think that even when you're doing things like Lighthouse projects, you still face the problem that however clear, however logical, however simple, executives don't necessarily implement. And some of that is to do, not necessarily to do with them, that you have, I think, in the business side of things, so little experience at significant change. On the IT side, you've got perpetual change. You've been doing it for 15, 20 years now, moving towards this more agile type of organization. But on the business side, you've got a lot of people who don't understand modern business. They don't understand what modern IT can deliver or what an agile business could deliver. And you do get a lot of resistance. Now, I think that's an interesting challenge for us all to start thinking about. There's nobody coaching these people that are in middle management, sometimes called the frozen middle, people who fear most change, and to some extent, people whose jobs revolve around pieces of paper being pushed around, being reported to, reporting on, and those types of things. So it comes back to our thing that can the agile coaching community take this kind of task on? Can you coach middle management? Do you want to?
Mm.
Would you dare?
We would dare as a courageous group. I just forgot any more. One from Inderjeet here. Wow, it's a long question. How do you manage the level of patience required to deliver in small chunks? If you're successful, I imagine pressure would build quickly to scale the success and do it everywhere, even before enough has been found, proven, learned. Okay.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I was kind of getting involved in this at Paddy Power, trying to deliver a new platform, and we did the same. We had one team, and we delivered one particular sports, and it was successful, and everyone was like, let's do it, let's run for let's get everything now, let everybody on board, we want to scale out. We had to hold them back a little bit, and we did that by having showcases with the executive team. So they would come every 2 weeks and listen to what the team were doing, and they would listen to the fact that there were still outstanding issues, still problems that they need to be resolved. And so, shortening the connection between the decision makers and the people doing the work and making it more personal. And allowing the team, and Haydn's written a piece on this in the book, around giving the team the autonomy, really giving them the autonomy to say, have they adapted, and are they ready to move on to the next thing? Do you want to cover that, Haydn?
No, I don't think I've got a lot to add to it.
That's essentially it. It's like you've got to give that team the ability to trust them, that they know when it's time to start cell division, as we call it.
Yeah, I think when you're thinking about patience as well, those are the things that Fin's talked about, how you resist the push to scale. I think Fin's covered it really well. But I think that the idea of patience in projects is quite important, because people are used to having projects designed in a particular way. they're accustomed to the momentum and the milestones. Actually, if you're looking at value, if you're looking to design projects around frequent delivery of value, it forces you to keep asking questions about what is the value of the work I'm doing. And I actually think that's a great way to go into work on a Monday morning and a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, actually. What is the value of what I'm doing? So you don't need patience, you need excitement.
And I think one of the other thing is, and this probably relates back to the buy-in stuff, and Scott could probably talk to this as well, because I often go to all hands meetings and staff meetings. I don't charge, I just turn up, I do them. And people say to me, thanks for coming. And I say, thank me after I've left, because generally I tell them exactly what's wrong with their organization. So in a certain bank up north, I think there are quite a few people walked out during my presentation. That's happened to me before in an energy company. The group CIO walked out. But then I got called back. So it's quite interesting when that happens. But yeah, it's around, we tell it as it is. We're the worst salespeople in the world. In fact, that's not our gig anyway. But they don't get to hear these things. And so, yeah, it's around getting them educated around value more than anything else. And we call out all the things that they do wrong, all of the cultural issues that they cause.
You were called back after that, had the opportunity to reflect on everything you'd said.
Well,
Decided there was merit and value in it.
Well, the energy company did, but the big bank didn't call me back. So you can imagine they were too big.
I don't see any more coming through. Any more questions, folks? We've got a few minutes. Well, I'll sort of do the usual community shout outs and a few announcements and wrap it up. Still an opportunity to get some valuable insight from Fin and Haydn while they're in our company. Don't be shy. Or even any more thoughts or reflections. It's quite a small group this evening, so yeah, if you want to unmute and share anything with the group, you're more than welcome to do so. Oh, you might be off the hook, gents.
Very good. Everyone's dying for a glass of wine, I think, or something.
I'll be slaving away in the kitchen again this evening, so yeah, definitely looking forward to a cold beer, that's for sure.
I think you explained it really well. You did it very simply. It's good graphics. You explained the problem and what needs to get done. So I think that's why there's not many questions. You're very polished.
Thank you. It's hard sometimes to get some of these concepts across, and do it in a way that doesn't overwhelm somebody or actually devalue them. So we've been doing our best to get it out there. So
great. No, looking forward to the book, that's for sure.
Very good.
I think it'll land well with people. Yeah, definitely need that. So simplifying problems. A lot of the sessions we've had, I've looked at that type of thing, removing the complexity and looking to focus on sort of adding the value and doing it as quickly as you can so that you can get buy-in. So all the stuff we've covered tonight. So really cool. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Sorry I missed the start, but I will definitely watch the recording.
Very good.
Cool.
Last opportunity, going once, going twice, as they say. No? All good. Hope you've enjoyed it, Haydn and Fin.
Yeah, it's good fun.
Yeah, enjoyed the session. Appreciate you joining us. Great to have you both here. Great to hear your insights. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
A round of applause, since I'm probably the only one unmuted. There you go, there's a few other Dorrells unmuted. Yeah, thank you again. Just to wrap up, we're a bit early tonight. What have we got? Next week, fabulous session coming up with Suzanne Doyle-Morris. That will be a slightly different format, so we're really looking forward to that. We're going to be hosting a panel discussion, and it'll be based on Suzanne's work from our recent book, The Con Job, basically looking at celebrating competence and moving away from this idea of people kind of progressing often based on sort of their ability to be confident and seem to be confident. So I think that's a really, really, really kind of interesting subject, and we've got a really good panel joining her. So I think that's going to be really cool. And the week after that, we have the one and only Dan Vacanti joining us from the States to do a nice session on how we continue to wrestle with the challenges of measuring things. So that'll be another really, really good session. So if you're interested in that, do sign up. And we have one more, I think, to close you out in August, which will be again, that'll be, yeah, so that will be the Curious Advantage. So Simon Brown will be joining us. He's the author of the Curious Advantage, so he'll be looking at the value of that as an approach. And he and his co-authors will join us from Switzerland. So that'd be really, really cool. And I'm sure many of you have seen, we have put out a communication to the community just to explain to everyone that after this month, we're kind of changing the frequency of events. So sadly, we're moving away from the weekly format that we've been running since April, but we will be continuing to run fortnightly events. So hopefully most of you have seen that. Sorry about that, but yeah, we'll keep the sessions coming. And if you do have any feedback for us as ever, get in touch. You can reach us through email on all our social channels or directly get in touch with myself, with Donald or Babs. So do please reach out if you have any thoughts or if you've got any speakers that you would like us to get in touch with or any topics you'd like us to bring to the community. We're more than happy to look into it. So yeah, thanks again for joining us. Lovely to see you all. Sorry I was late, and yeah, hopefully see you soon. Take care. All the best. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, folks.